Just test it a bit more. Is that all right? Yeah, seems all right. Yeah, okay. Right, good evening everyone, and I think I'm ready to go. I've got more electrical equipment out here than curries, I think, and so we'll see how it goes. Now this evening I'm going to tell you all about the fun that families could have on holiday in Clacton, from boat trips to donkey rides and knobbly knee competitions to enjoying a show at the Ocean Theatre on Clacton Pier. This is part one of my talk, and this evening I'm concentrating on the years from 1945 to 75, and part two next year perhaps. Now just look at that crowded beach. Well, we'll be looking at how all those holiday makers came to Clacton, by steam train, by coach and by car. And where did they all stay? They could choose to stay in a caravan, or perhaps a week in a hotel or guest house, or have a chalet at Butlins. By the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, Clacton was one of the most popular holiday resorts in the country, and 100,000 visitors a week came to Clacton during the summer months, which is amazing. And Butlins had opened in 1938 and had been especially popular with families from London, so it had only opened a year when of course it had to close because of the war. And the centre of Clacton had been badly damaged by enemy bombing. That was in May 1941, and the building on the left had been Clacton's first town hall, but was then Barclays Bank at the time of the bombing. And the clock tower had to be pulled down by the council's steamroller, and you can see it at a strange angle in the small photo in the middle there. The present clock tower wasn't built until 1952 or 53. And on the right there, that's Wagstaff's Corner, and that was badly damaged in that bombing too. Then in February 1940, a floating German mine had damaged the centre of the pier, and that's Ernest Kingsman there, the pier owner, on the left, discussing the incident with a council official. Two members of the lifeboat crew, including 84-year-old Tom Fairweather, they'd just entered the lifeboat house at the end of the pier and luckily escaped injury. Apparently Tom's first words were, "I think I could do with a drink." But 84 seems quite old. Perhaps he was just a sort of a volunteer. Many shops in the town centre had to be repaired or rebuilt after air raids in the war. Here's Marks and Spencer's in Pier Avenue after an incendiary bomb raid in May 1944, and it had to be rebuilt, and other shops nearby like Woolworths and Jenkins Jones here on the right, they needed new windows and shop fronts. When the war ended in May 1945, the beaches along the coast had to be cleared of barbed wire, tank traps and scaffolding, put up of course to deter enemy troops from landing. Even in August 1947, some beaches at Clacton and Holland-on-Sea were still closed because of mines and piles of barbed wire. One visitor wrote in his diary, "August the 10th, 1945, trains to Clacton were packed and it was impossible to get any food. After walking 2 miles, I found a little cafe and was able to get 2 spam sandwiches. Nearly all the beaches were covered in barbed wire and damaged beach huts. Then everyone got drenched by a sudden storm. I'd waited 6 years for a day at the seaside, and it was a dreadful disappointment." Now the left-hand photo, that's of the greensward on Marine Parade West down towards the Butlins end, and that shelter's still there nowadays. Apparently there were no mines there, despite the sign. It was what was called a dummy minefield, but there were plenty of mines elsewhere, especially on the golf course nearby. Butlins holiday camp had been taken over by the army in 1939, and some chalets had been demolished, and floodlights and barbed wire perimeter fence had been erected. And after the war, the camp was handed back to Butlins, who were shocked by the state of some of the chalets. The winters had been cold, and soldiers had pulled up floorboards to put on their fires to keep warm. But I'm sure Billy Butlin got a lot of compensation for the damage because he was quite a shrewd businessman. A lot of work was done, and on the 6th of April 1946, the camp opened with 800 guests, and there were 17,000 applicants for the 500 or so staff that were needed. This is the Carvosso family. They came down from Barking, and they all came down for the first week at Butlins that it opened. I think they must have had more than one chalet though. Many workers now had 1 week's paid holiday a year, and Butlins was the ideal place to be. And fun for everyone, and the mothers didn't have to do any cooking, or the fathers. The Squadronaires entertained the campers. They were an ex-RAF band who included Cliff Townsend, whose son was Pete Townsend, who became famous playing for a group called The Who. Second from the left in the photo was George Chisholm. I always remember when I was young watching him on the television playing funny tunes on his trombone. One of the Squadronaires' hits was Down in Chi Chi Hotcha Watchu, so imagine asking for that in a record shop. In July 1945, the Blue Lagoon Dance Hall, which was at the front of Clacton Pier, reopened, and Teddy Dobbs and his band played there again. They'd played there before the war, and everyone danced the night away. Ernest Kingsman had sadly died in 1942, but his wife Ada and son Barney, they took over the running of the pier, and I think they enjoyed it. Mrs. Kingsman would sit and watch everyone dancing in the Blue Lagoon, and if there was any wild dancing, she'd bang her stick on the floor and point to the sign on the wall which said no jitterbugging, which was sort of a wild American type dance. And Teddy Dobbs would have to stop the music until normal dancing resumed. In 1947, the Golden Eagle steamer started operating from Clacton Pier, and it went to Tower Pier in London and Greenwich and Southend. And there was also an hour-long trip on a boat called the Gay Commodore that just travelled up the coast. Then in 1948, the swimming pool opened again. It had been built and opened in 1932 and was very popular, although the seawater pumped into it always seemed so cold, and the ladies on the right do look like they're shivering a bit. When the Jolly Roger had been repaired, it opened with a show called the Lagoon Follies, and this was in 1948, and there were 2 children's shows as well each day with Uncle Tommy, and the Lagoon Follies was in the evening. The producer was a young comedian at the time called Ian Carmichael, who when I was young, I remember I used to watch a TV programme called The World of Worcester, but he made a lot of films too. Another actor in the Lagoon Follies was a young Terry Scott, and again he later appeared in 7 Carry On films, and I remember a TV programme called Terry and June that we all used to watch, and I think Hugh and I as well with Hugh Lloyd, that was another popular programme. So by the 1950s, Clacton was once again a top holiday resort with golden sands and champagne air, as they'd call it, and plenty of sunshine. It was especially popular with Londoners who wanted to escape from their bomb-damaged streets. So now we're going to look at how all these families came to sunny Clacton. In the 1950s, most people came by coach or steam train. By 1952, petrol was at a high of 1 6pence a gallon, and many families didn't own a car anyway. Hundreds of coaches would arrive in the town on Saturdays especially, and the coach parks would be packed. This one was in Old Road, where Waterglade shops are nowadays. It was the town yard as well, and you can just see a goalpost on the right there from Clacton Town Football Club. Just back to that last picture again. So one weekend in September 1952, 406 coaches full of holidaymakers arrived in the town, and that's unbelievable really, and that was September too, 406 coaches. Where Aldi is nowadays in Old Road, opposite the cinema, used to be the Warwick Castle Hotel, and it was demolished in 1973. They were going to build a block of flats there, but never did. And for many years there was, of course, that popular market on the site that we used to call the Warwick Castle Market. Empire Best Coaches had their coach park on one side of the Warwick Castle, and Premier Travel had their coaches on the other side. The Empire Best coaches came down to Clacton 3 times a day, and they came with what they claimed was the picturesque route coming down from Bermondsey and Walworth and through Enfield and Waltham Cross down to Clacton. Sometimes these journeys would take quite a while though, and they'd have to stop at a pub or a cafe for food. There were often huge traffic jams, especially at the Army and Navy roundabout in Chelmsford and at Marks Tay. That was a real bottleneck there. At one time, the A12 only had one stretch of dual carriageway, and the road was often littered with overheated and broken down cars. Premier Premier travel coaches, they often picked up passengers in the Midlands too, in Cambridge and Leicester, that had come down from the north of England on Yellowway coaches. And then they'd bring them down to Clacton and Walton. Grey-green was popular too, and bottom right there's a grey-green coach at the Wash Lane coach station, which some of you may remember. The police station is on that site nowadays. At the coach parks on the railway station, the Barrow boys, of course, will be waiting to greet visitors and take them and their luggage to their many guest houses, but they dreaded the long walk down to Butlins. Many youngsters, if they had a paper round as well during the week, they earned as much money in a week as their dads did working in factories. Taxi drivers got a bit fed up with this, with the luggages, and this man said, "Those Barrow boys are taking away my business. They don't just use barrows. One boy the other day had an upturned table on wheels, and he had 4 suitcases on it. Another lad used a pram to carry the suitcases up the road, and the baby was still in it." In the 1950s and 60s, some families did drive down from London and towed their own caravans to the many sites in the area, of course. Here's Broadway in Jaywick Sands, looking rather busy. This is in 1956, and Saturdays were changeover days, of course, and when holidaymakers left and new ones arrived. Looks like it's been raining here. There's a few puddles on the road and the pavement, but the pavement looks in a worse state than the road, and I'm not sure those ladies with the pushchair are looking where they're going, but perhaps traffic was a bit slower in those days. It was more exciting sometimes, especially for youngsters, to travel to Clacton by steam train than by car or coach, and the railway station there looks rather busy in the main photo. There's a ticket machine, a platform ticket machine on the left there, and I can see a Nestle's chocolate machine in the middle of the crowd there. In 1950, a new hourly train service from Liverpool Street proved popular. The advert claimed, "Within 2 hours you'll be transported from the fogs of London to the fresh air of Clacton-on-Sea." In the hot summer of 1952, railway lines buckled in the heat just outside Clacton station, and holidaymakers were allowed to leave the train carrying their luggage and walk along the track to the platform. On another occasion in 1952, sheep wandered on the track at Thorpe-le-Sauken. The guard wandered through and told the rather hot and annoyed passengers, "They're only looking for water to drink. We'll stop here for a while." That's the Oxford Road footbridge there in that photo, and nearby was a train turntable that some of us remembered. By 1956, there were more train services from the north of England coming down to Clacton. You could leave Manchester at 1:25 in the afternoon and arrive in Clacton at 8:41 in the evening, which does seem a very long time. I think I'd need a few snacks to keep me going. In June 1958, the Essex Coast Express was introduced and only made 2 stops at Colchester and Thorpe-le-Sauken on its way to the town. George Cook was the driver of the first express train, and a group of Clacton schoolboys were filmed by the BBC at the event. Train spotting, of course, was quite a popular hobby. The 2 girls were Penny and Leslie Vince, and Clas Jansma is one of the young boys in the photos on the right there. He's one of our members. Butlins ran their own express train as well, and redcoats would greet the families as they arrived at Clacton station and make sure that the buses would transfer them down the road to the camp. Here's another busy scene, and I think bottom right there's a Butlins redcoat helping a chap with some advice there, but it does look very, very crowded. April 1959, and the first electric train service started from Clacton to Colchester, then on to Liverpool Street in 1963, but I don't think it was much faster though. This ticket is from Bradford to Clacton, and the holidaymaker also had the bus ticket. You might just see in the middle there, it's got by Eastern National Omnibus Company from Clacton Station to Jaywick Sands. So they would come down on the train and then get the bus off to Jaywick. And here's the Jaywick Sands bus station. Behind the Eastern National buses used to be a pub called the Sheldrake. I think it shut a few years ago. It's flats nowadays, but that was always very popular with the the people going home back to London. I love the Morris cars there, you can see. Back in the 1950s, there were so many places to stay in Clacton, of course. A family holiday staying in a chalet at Butlins was popular, and caravan holidays were fun too. Although caravans were much smaller in those days, and it could be a long walk to the toilet block in the middle of the night, of course. In the summer months, every guest house and hotel was full, and sometimes families arrived in the town without booking anywhere to stay. They'd walk the streets with their heavy luggage and tired children knocking on guest house doors, almost pleading for a room. Sometimes they had to spend the night sleeping in seafront shelters or under the pier, and then try again next day. It wasn't all good news for the Clacton hotels though after the war. The Grand Hotel on Clacton seafront, that actually closed in World War II and then reopened as St Osy's Teacher Training College in 1949. And top right photo is Towers Hotel, and that never reopened as a hotel either. Of course, both buildings still stand and are flats and apartments. Beaumont Hall Hotel, that was a splendid building. It's been renovated and another floor added nowadays, but that was known as you can see, as the hotel with a house party atmosphere. It attracted the more sporty visitors from London, as it had 4 croquet lawns, a 3-ring bowling green, 3 tennis courts and a putting green. There's the extra visitors had to pay down the bottom there. It was a shilling for a hot bath and 6pence for a cold one. And I wonder if it was 9pence for a warm bath though. Each morning your tea would be 4pence, and if you wanted an electric fire for the whole day, it was 2 and 6pence. If you wanted your shoes cleaned and left outside your door, it was another 3pence. So life was very different back then. You might remember the Waverley Hotel on Clacton seafront. Premier Inn is on the site nowadays, not quite the same. And in the 1950s it was a temperance hotel, which meant no alcohol. And activities there for the visitors were less sporty. They included whist and beetle drives and billiards and singing competitions, so mainly indoor activities there. And then there's Alton Hall. That had been built in 1934, used by the army in the war. And they had a good slogan, you can just see it on the left there, where holidays are jolly days. I like that. And Alton Hall had a sunbathing roof and 140 bedrooms. By 1966 that had closed, and that was part of St Osy's Teachers Training College as well. In Carnarvon Road, opposite the car park, is Kingsgate Care Home nowadays, and back in the 1950s it was the Shakespeare Hotel. I like the slogan, as you like it, it says, which is quite clever. One of the adverts said, not the largest rooms by any means, but considered the best. I'm not sure I would have mentioned the size of the rooms really, that might put holidaymakers off staying there. Ebor Lodge was another popular hotel along Marine Parade East, and it had a jolly rhyme. At Ebor Lodge, they know every dodge for bringing delight to each guest. I came in feeling jaded, but that mood soon faded, and I'm going home filled with new zest. And I like the phrase, sunshine and smiles greet you at breakfast. That was very nice. Now, the Glengarry Hotel on Marine Parade East was Clacton's happiest hotel. Down the bottom, it says, all bedrooms hot and cold, so I suppose they mean hot and cold water, but, rather than the temperature. And the hotel had separate tables, which meant you had your own table to eat at for meals. No attic rooms, which was quite important, because often some hotels put customers up in the attic. Electric fires and spring interior mattresses. I know Norman told me earlier he stayed there with his parents in 1963. And the building still stands, but it's no longer a hotel, of course. In 1953, there were 100 hotels and guest houses in Clacton, which is amazing, and 146 B&Bs, and that's just part of the list there. In the holiday season, children were often moved out of their bedrooms and to sleep in the lounge, or even the shed or the bath, apparently, and so their rooms could be let out to visitors. One lady would have her hair done on Saturday morning, put on a smart dress and stand outside the railway station with a sign saying bed and breakfast available. Apparently her spare bedroom would be let for most of the summer, usually by single men who would come on holiday to the town. Here's some memories told to me recently. I remember staying in a boarding house in Clacton in the 1950s. The advert had said 1 minute from the sea. I reckon that was true if we went by jet. We had to leave the house every morning by 9:30, even if it was raining, and weren't allowed back in until 4:30 p.m. The landlady was Mrs. D, and she was strict. Once I ran down the stairs and she screamed at me. We all sat on our beds at 5 p.m, waiting for the dinner gong, and at meal times we ate in silence. My mum was frightened to tell Mrs. D she didn't have a fork. Dad had a bottle of beer in his room, and the landlady told him the next day she didn't allow drunks in her establishment. The following year we came back to Clacton, to Butlins. Of course, writing a postcard home was to say you've arrived safely was often one of the first things we did when we went on holiday, although the postcards often arrived the next day, not like nowadays. Here's 2 sent from Clacton. Who put the butter on the bread, Mrs. Jones? I do, sir. And who scrapes it off again? Full up. Dear me, couldn't you squeeze me in a little top room? I could, but I'm too busy. And then here are some excerpts from adverts and leaflets for Clacton guest houses and B&Bs in the 50s and early 60s. We have hot water in our hand basins, unlike some other guest houses in Clacton. Hot water bottles are also available. Beware of the dog, don't move too fast, you've been warned. No restrictions, the front door is locked at 11 o'clock. Even OAPs can manage our stairs. A homely guest house, your children are welcome if polite and well behaved. And do-it-yourself ironing and airing room, just like being at home. That's some great ones there. But of course, many families chose to stay in caravan sites, caravan parks in the 50s and 60s, and they still are popular nowadays, of course. I do, looking at that picture on the right, remember the shape of those ice cream cones that those children are eating there. Sort of often the slab of ice cream was cut up, wasn't it, into pieces to put into the wafers and that. And here's the swimming pool at Highfields. That used to be outdoors only, and there was plenty of entertainment. And in 1970, there was a psychedelic double-decker which took families to the seafront from Highfields and Meadowview Camp, which was in Little Clacton. Valley Farm was popular too, although it was a long way from the beach, a bit like Highfields, but it described itself as in the countryside, and again, it's still a great place to stay. There's the bar at Valley Farm, and those caravans look very bright and colourful and all neatly arranged. No running water in the caravan, and we had to go across the field to the block for the toilet and a shower. Dirty water from the sink went down a pipe into a bucket under the caravan, and we had to go and empty that down the drain. We didn't care, we were on holiday. There were lots of smaller camps too around Clacton, Rosebank and Castle Hill, and in Thorpe Road, Great Clacton, near where I live, was Highlands Camp, and it was chalets there in its later years. Many local children climbed the fence and learned to swim in the pool. The old wooden clubhouse was replaced by a brick one, and nowadays it's Bramble Way with modern bungalows on the site. Holidays in Jaywick Sands, of course, were very popular, and many families came here every year to the same properties. On our Local History Society's Facebook page, there's so many photos and memories of happy times spent in Jaywick Sands. And of course, Jaywick Sands had its own row of shops. There was the Sunspot and the Morocco Club, and a good bus service into Clacton. They had donkey rides and children's entertainment and a skating rink and much more. Some families never left Jaywick in the week they were there. For a more peaceful holiday though, many families found Holland-on-Sea perfect because there were sandy beaches and seafront cafes, and it was away from the noise and crowds of Clacton. Of course, Butlins was the place to go for organised fun, and many people really enjoyed that in the 1940s and 50s, and that was the heyday for Clacton Butlins. Some of the thousands of holidaymakers that stayed there never went out of the gates during their time there. Meanwhile, all the Clacton youngsters were desperately trying to get into the camp through holes in the fence or any other means. Now, a holiday in Clacton in the 1950s and 60s meant sunshine, glorious beaches and fun for all the family. There were the usual struggles of trying to put a deck chair up, changing on the beach without showing any bare flesh, and making sure your woolen swimming trunks didn't fall down if you were afraid. Dad could embarrass you by putting a hanky on his head, and you nearly chop your toes off with one of those nasty metal spades when you tried burying your sister. One of the first things visitors did was send a postcard home and then look at the week's weather in a sort of glass-like cupboard on the seafront near the Clacton War Memorial. Now you've got to remember there was no local radio weather reports in those days or BBC weather apps, and some guest houses didn't even have a television where you could see the weather forecast. And Harry Clark was Clacton's council weatherman, and he'd write out the weather forecast and put it in the cupboard for holiday makers and locals to see. It was usually pinned up by drawing pins. And there was a barograph there, you can see in the picture, and that recorded the air pressure. If the metal arm was moving up the paper, it meant fine weather, but if it was moving down, it meant it was going to be cloudy and rainy. Clacton was famous for tulip time in the 1950s, and special trains and coaches would bring thousands of visitors to see the tulips, which would be in displays all over the town in May each year, in people's gardens as well. And there was a tulip time in Clacton song. Tulip time, I won't sing it. Tulip time, what a sight to see. Now spring is here, you'll hear them cheer at Clacton by the sea. Tulip time, sun and champagne air. The season starts with happy hearts and tulips everywhere. And I'm sure it must have been wonderful to see there. Now in 1952, Harry Thompson was appointed to be the new publicity and entertainments manager in Clacton. And Harry immediately organised a winter tour of towns in the Midlands to publicise the delights of Clacton-on-Sea. And Premier Travel donated a coach, and it was converted inside to be a cinema. And as it toured the towns like Sheffield and Nottingham, people could go in the coach and watch a film about Clacton called Back to the Sun. There's Harry Thompson in the striped waistcoat, looking a bit like Hugh Grant. And the ladies handed out brochures and newspapers advertising Clacton. Now these photos were taken in February in Coventry and Nottingham, and Harry was brave though. He made sure each girl was only out in the snow for 15 minutes at a time. What a kind man he was. Now there he is in his thick coat on the left there, and with 18-year-old Elizabeth Lewis smiling bravely. But of course, photos like this often made the front pages of newspapers like the Daily Mirror, so it was good publicity for Clacton. Harry Thompson also made sure that Clacton's holiday brochures were more colourful. He came up with slogans such as, for champagne air and everything under the sun. They do like the champagne air bit, don't they? And Clacton is a kiddie's paradise. Happy and contented children mean a happy holiday for father and mother too. And Clacton-on-Sea for family holidays, sunshine, sea and sands. And Harry did a lot of his own artwork, as you can see here, and then produced it in the holiday brochures. He loved taking his own photographs too, but he got annoyed if his photos he took didn't come out. In this one he didn't like it because you can see on the right there a young boy suddenly pranced in front of the ladies in the photo, although it does look quite a happy photo really, but apparently he didn't use it in a brochure. These were entrants in a beauty contest, and Harry was up a ladder, and the ladies on the right-hand side were so keen on winning the tug-of-war, he kept shouting, "Look at Harry, look at Harry!" And of course they all didn't, and he ended up slipping off the ladder apparently, hurting his back. But again, it looks quite a good photo, doesn't it? The Clacton publicity campaign, though, definitely worked, and 1,000 more visitors came to Clacton from the towns and cities, especially in the north of England and the Midlands. And on August Bank Holiday 1955, 100,000 visitors arrived. Harry organised many competitions at the band pavilion, including the Clacton-on-Sea Ideal Holiday Girl of Great Britain contest, and it would be held all around the country with the final back in Clacton, and often the BBC television cameras came to film the final, so again more good publicity. There was so much for holidaymakers to see and do. Harry Thompson called Clacton a show-busy holiday resort and published every few weeks a sort of a list of what was on in the town to be hung up in shops and guest houses. And the one on the right there, you might see the Bachelors and Dick Emery and the Comedians and Semprini in a celebrity concert. So again, it was good publicity. It was said there were so many people on Clacton Beach that the tide couldn't get in, and it certainly did get busy at times. Now in the 1950s and 60s, of course, boat trips from the West Beach were next to Clacton Pier were really popular. That's the Viking Saga there, ready to leave, and I'm not sure the man on the right-hand side of the photo carrying a deck chair and knows where he's going. He's going to walk into someone in a minute, I think. For many years it was run by Dick Harmon until he sold it in 1974. But there's a nice photo of a happy group on the boat. And there's Dick Harmon, and we've got the Viking Saga sign, or one of them, in our museum in Clacton Library, open every Tuesday and Saturday morning. The sea trip on the Viking Saga, I think, has just ended on this photo. You can still see Still Stella in the background, which was that wonderful roller coaster built in 1937. It was never actually taken down during the war. And on the right, you can just see a sign for a Salvation Army meeting on the beach. A lot of us remember the pirate radio ship Radio Caroline, which was moored off Holland Haven, and many people would drive nearby to flash their car headlights at the DJs on Radio Caroline in the good old days. And when the Viking Saga took trippers out to see the ship in 1964 and 65, everyone would excitedly rush over one side of the boat, and poor old Dick Harmon would worry that the Viking Saga would tip over. And you can still have a trip on the Viking Saga, as it's moored at Malden nowadays. Nemo too was a smaller boat, but just as popular, and youngsters were often allowed to hold the ship's wheel to steer the boat, so they enjoyed that. Unfortunately, Nemo is not still afloat, and here's a photograph of it on a Welsh beach in 2006, looking in a very poor state. On Clacton Beach, the diving platforms were a favourite, although swimmers often injure themselves diving into about 6 inches of water. They couldn't work out how deep the water was. And the picture on the left there, there's a lot going on there. There's a boy on a pedalo as well, I think, isn't it? And on Clacton Beach as well, there were diving platforms, and they were very, very favourite as well. I've just done that one. And there were rafts too, again, which looked rather busy. The lads have all got their woolen swimming trunks on. Nowadays, you don't see many deck chairs on the beach in Clacton, and in the past there'd be piles of them waiting for customers, and it was often the only time of the year that we put up a deck chair, and sometimes it was quite a struggle. Sometimes it went up easily and other times not. Looks like Ronnie Barker there, sitting there in the deck chair hut at Clacton, and the sign says you can hire a deck chair for 16p, which seems rather a silly amount, plus a 10p deposit. The gents on the left had the job of repairing the council deck chairs at Clacton. Looks like they've got quite a pile to repair there. Along the seafront in the 50s and 60s were hundreds of these white chairs. We've got one in our museum, and they were quite uncomfortable to sit on, although that man in the middle has managed to nod off on one. Here's a twopenny ticket there for a white chair. I think that might be Ronnie Mills there, a well-known Clacton band leader, looking at the camera. Clacton holidaymakers apparently were said to be the worst for not paying to sit on the white chairs. Everyone would sit on them, and then when the ticket collector came along, they'd jump off and walk off quickly, but I'm sure they did that in other seaside resorts as well. Another must for the holidaymakers in Clacton was to have their photo taken by one of the beach photographers. This was Les Keeble, and he worked from a bright yellow Kodak shed on the seafront near the pier. You might just see it in the centre photo there. On Clacton Beach, sorry, I'll just right, I'll just go back to photo there, sorry. And that was Les Keeble. You can see it in the background. So if you like the photo, it will be developed the next day, and then you'd have a souvenir of your holiday. I'm not sure the ladies on the right are smiling, but they must have paid for the photo to be developed, as we have it in our archives. There was so much for families to do in Clacton in the summer months in the 50s and 60s, and really there was, things they could do in all weathers. Clacton Carnival usually happened on a Wednesday afternoon in the 1950s and 60s, as that was shops' early closing day, and a lot of them obeyed that rule. And Butlins always entered a lot of floats. Bottom left there's Eric Winston in his orchestra on the lorry there. There's huge crowds watching the carnival procession, and that's Grimwade and Clark's shop in the background there with the shop blind down. McDonald's is on that site nowadays, so this is Station Road. Sometimes the procession went away from the seafront, and sometimes the procession went back towards it. Lots of decorated prams and wheelbarrows in this carnival photo. It's Pier Avenue. In the top right there you can see Marshall's Amusements, and then the Criterion and Gaiety restaurants were coming back towards the seafront. And on the right there's the Kersal Flyer from Southend, and that used to come for quite a few years. It looks a bit dangerous where that young lad's sitting on the front of it though. Roller skating was fun if you could do it. I used to have to hang on to someone or onto the railings round the side, and there was a rink down by Butlins which was often packed, and you just strapped the skates onto your shoes, as you can see in the photos. And at Jaywick there was another skating rink. I hope the man on the left doesn't fall over though, because he's not wearing much, is he? But it could be painful. I love the photo at the top though with Nan, or is it Mum, learning to skate. They look so proud, don't they? Until recently, the Martello on the seafront near Clacton Hospital, that was a tea room, and in 1946 there was an 18-hole putting green behind it. And you can see a scorecard there for July 1946, when it was six old pennies around. For many years there was a model village in the moat around the Martello Tower, and the model railway had railway stations too, called Castle Junction and Martello Central. That was their names. But I love a model village, and one of the shops on the right says I Skinham, pork butcher, and the greengrocer's called Mr. Marra. But it was certainly a splendid model village, and I wonder what happened to all those buildings. In the early 1970s, it was a children's zoo there with admission, children 5p, adults 10p, and it has been a petting zoo as well over the years, I think. An amazing spectacle at the Band Pavilion in 1965 was the Dancing Waters. Visitors young and old were fascinated. There was 2,000 jets that fired water 30 foot into the air in time to music such as Hungarian Rhapsody, and coloured spotlights lit up the fountains. And it all happened in the part of the pavilion that's now Armstrong's restaurant, so if there's a damp patch on the ceiling, you know why. In 1971, the pavilion advertised Marineland with exotic fish and reptiles and Wonder World. Again, this was pretty amazing. It was described as a magical walk-round journey with animated models and sound effects, and it was quite modern for the time, apparently. And then, of course, there was the yacht ponds. That was another popular family attraction, not really used nowadays. It's still along the seafront by the Clacton Hospital car park. But some toddlers used to use this as a paddling pool as well. And there's another shot. There's a few yachts being sent across the yacht pond. The building on the left there was the Palace. That was built in 1906. And over the years it'd been a theatre. It'd been used for roller skating and had amusements. And in the 1950s there was a waxworks there. And it was called Louis Tussaud's Great Historical Exhibition, and included a display on the horrors of the concentration camp. Now this was quite gory, and as you imagine, didn't go down very well so soon after World War II. And there used to be a menagerie there as well, but that had to close down after 6 snakes escaped. One snake was found in the gents' toilets down on the lower prom. It was in 1950 that Nora Cleghorn started donkey rides at the far end of the greensward. They were brought from Jaywick along West Road every morning and trotted back at the end of the day, surrounded by Nora and her helpers on their bicycles. And children, of course, loved Punch and Judy on the beach as well. Claude North Jr. Had his show here in the 1950s, and just after VE Day in May 1945, he was invited to perform at Windsor Castle in front of Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, and of course that was a great honour for him. The trouble with Punch and Judy was that everyone would watch the Punch and Judy performance and then disappeared when the collection box was passed around. The fun fair by Butlins, of course, was very popular, and there was a fun house and a shooting range and roundabouts and other rides, especially for the children. The Wild Mouse was said to be a more scary ride than Still Stella on Clacton Pier. You can see it in those photos there. And then to settle your stomach, of course, you could buy some candy floss or donuts after going on the ride. Now, children and teenagers nowadays on holiday, they still say the same thing to their parents. Can we go on the pier? And there was, like nowadays, there was always new rides and attractions. Back in 1950, it was the same, and Ada Kingsman and her son Barney wanted Clacton Pier to once again to be the best in Britain, like it was in the 1930s. And just on the pier on the left was built the Queen Mary building, and there was a lot more seating upstairs. It looks quite a sun trap up there. You can just see the diving board to the swimming pool there, just above where those people are sunbathing. And down below was the mirror maze, which it was always quite tricky to walk round without getting your nose flattened, wasn't it? But on the top of the diving board there's quite a crowd of youngsters, isn't it? The Cresta Run was another new attraction, and that blew down in 1956 and actually again in 2013. And this month it's down again as it's being renovated and repainted. By Still Stella, which was that amazing roller coaster, there was Peter Pan's Children's Railway, and they had quite a long track. You got quite a good journey for your money, and children used to love it and would go on it again and again. And of course the swimming pool was still there. That was continued to be busy, and lots of local school children and visitors learned to swim there. Clacton Swimming Club had their headquarters there too. And so did Clacton Water Polo Team. They were one of the best in East Anglia, and there was also swimming galas there. In the centre of the pier was the Ocean Theatre, which had been built in 1928, and in the 1960s Frank Adey produced summer shows there with some up-and-coming stars such as Roy Hudd, and then on the left there you might see in the poster there Ted Rogers. This was in 1963. Do you remember he went on to Dusty Bin and 321, however it used to go. And then when the Goss family bought the pier in 1971, they realised that summer shows were not so popular as they used to be, so they decided to pay more for some well-known TV stars to come down during the summer months. And you can see Dick Emery there in 1972. And Dick Emery was very good. He helped publicise the show by owning school fetes and being seen around the town. I think he stayed up in Little Clacton there. In 1973, popular TV stars, the comedians, who included Russ Abbott, Jim Bowen and Jimmy Marshall, were booked for the summer show. And it was during one of their summer shows that Still Stella caught fire, and the comedians helped the audience of 3,000 leave quickly and without too much panic apparently, although Jimmy Marshall was more keen to get his Rolls Royce or Bentley off the pier, nearly knocking over everyone leaving. Sadly, Still Stella was so badly damaged it had to be demolished, and the fire was caused by an electrical fault. Also in 1973 there were lots of special shows at the Ocean Theatre on Sundays with well-known TV stars. You can see on the right there Morecambe and Wise, Rolf Harris, and on the left there Dick Emery and Vince Hill. I think my mum always used to love Vince Hill. And Frank Ifield used to yodel, didn't he? And Mike Reid, of course, was a London sort of comedian, wasn't he? Harry Worth was the star in 1974, and I remember doing Harry's hand and foot thing, but you had to find a good shop window if you wanted to impress your friends by doing it. And, of course, all the shop workers would be looking out as you were doing it. Other stars in Harry Worth's show were Peter Goodright, who was an impressionist, and Di Francis, who was from the Black and White Minstrel show that was a very popular TV show, wasn't it, on BBC. You can see Leslie Crowther starred at the Ocean Theatre in 1975, but there were plenty of other attractions on the pier, such as Rolo and Shandy, and in those days you could park as well at the front of the pier. Rolo and Shandy were musical clowns. They were loved by young children, and there's wonderful Lenny Blease as well. I remember Rolo and Shandy in the winter, they'd go around schools sort of doing road safety exhibitions. and they bring a car and do road safety on the playground for the schools. And Lenny Blease, of course, was a bus conductor as well, and during his bus journey, often he'd be doing magic tricks to amuse the passengers. And Lenny appeared on a TV programme called Opportunity Knocks in 1976. It wouldn't be allowed nowadays, of course, but dolphin shows on the pier in England were very popular and packed with holidaymakers. The pier swimming pool was closed, and then the first dolphin to arrive was called Maria, with 2 sea lions, Adolf and Salah. That was in 1971. In the summer of 1972, the dolphinarium opened and Reg Bloom was in charge. There's a funny picture here of Rod Hull and Emu tickling the dolphin, but I wonder if Rod Hull or Emu grabbed Reg Bloom by the neck and threw him in the pool. That would have been a better photo, wouldn't it? And some penguins arrived as well. 6 Humboldt penguins arrived in 1973, and some of these penguins were later stars for a TV advert for my favourite chocolate bar. Do you remember Pick Up a Penguin? Other new rides on the pier in the early 70s was the Skyliner on the left there. That was sort of an aerial ride at the far end of the pier. And the Waltzer, and the Waltzer's back now on Clacton Pier the last few years, and the Big Wheel. People on the Skyliner often lost shoes or dropped handbags, never to be seen again. By 1960, no passport trips to Calais were very popular with holidaymakers from the end of Clacton Pier. The crossing was often very rough, and the lady in the small photo there on the bench, she looks a bit seasick, doesn't she, all fed up. Calais is closer. That means more time for fun. Enjoy wonderful food and wine. See the fascinating French shops. Have a flutter in the casino. Delight in the best channel bathing. Relive Franco-British history on your trip. And Carol told me in 1964 she went to Calais on a school trip with Clacton County High School. Because of the rough seas, it took so long to get there. The group only had 30 minutes to go in the shops. On the return trip, the youngsters all had sword fights with their French loaves they'd bought. Meanwhile, the teachers were all sick after drinking bottles of the really cheap red wine they'd bought. After an inquiry back at school, the following year the trip was to Colchester Castle. So finally, from my talk, we're just going to look at just a few more of the activities that people could enjoy while on holiday in Clacton. I won't mention everything, as I hope to do part 2 next year. Well, of course, holidaymakers could always go shopping, and Marks and Spencer's, seen here in 1959, was popular, and you can just see the edge of Woolworths there as well, next door. And Cook and Eve's, that was in Pier Avenue. That sold everything from toys and souvenirs to tobacco and cameras. Clinton Cards was on the site until a few years ago. I think nowadays it's a new opticians has opened there. And then the bottom photo on the right was Spall's, and that was another busy shop, popular with visitors and locals. And families really had so many shops in Clacton in those days to explore and to buy those holiday gifts that you always had to take home, didn't you, for your friends and family. Lots of coach day trippers brought their own food and drink with them when they came to Clacton. They were nicknamed nosebaggers by the locals, but families staying in bed and breakfast, of course, needed meals out, and there were some excellent restaurants to choose from, such as the Criterion and the Gaiety, which are, you might just see on the right of this photo here. Or they might go to Cordy's on the seafront for a meal, or those delicious cream cakes. And there was often a queue outside, but it could seat 600. And we've got a sign from Cordy's in the middle there, wait here to be seated, in our museum in Clacton Library. And then, of course, mystery tours were fun. Sometimes even the coach driver didn't know where he was going. Frank told me, we came from Suffolk for a week's holiday and went on a mystery tour. We drove for an hour and stopped for refreshment in a pub. It was the pub in the village where I lived, and my parents were in there having a drink. After a drink and a chat with them, the coach drove us back to Clacton. That's a great story, that one. Well done, Frank. And here's West Avenue with people just wandering across the road, and behind the red telephone box there were underground toilets that some of us may remember. To the left of the large tree there, where a shop called Peacock's is nowadays, was a cinema called the Kinema, or the Flea Pit to locals. And there it is there. It was demolished in 1962, and just before it was demolished, that photo was taken. Where Argos is nowadays was a splendid art deco cinema, cinema called the Odeon, and it was where visitors would go if it was raining, because the films would start in the afternoon and go on till the end. And of course it was very popular with local children on Saturday mornings too. It was a shame it was demolished in 1983. I looked the other day online, and Weston-super-Mare have got a similar building to that. Theirs is still open and called the Plaza, which is a shame. The Isoldo in the 1960s realised that the summer holidays was the time to attract visitors. Nowadays it's still our cinema, and it's been called the Century Cinema. And they realised that as well as films, they ought to put on shows, especially in the summer months. And for a few weeks in 1963, you might just see on the right, Kenny Ball and his Jazzmen were there, they played there, and there was a show with Mike Sarn and John Layton in. And on another day, Giant Haystacks was in a wrestling match, and apparently his match was stopped when the floor of the wrestling ring splintered, when Giant Haystacks was flattened by his opponent, Judo Al Hayes. There were more shows to see at the Savoy Theatre, that was in Rosemary Road. And the building's empty at present and in a very poor state. Over the years it's been a bingo hall, a cinema and a nightclub. There's a poster for Mrs. Mills, who was a well-known pianist and described as our glad. And Wally Dunn, small photo there, he was known as Clacton's own comedian, and he was also in that show. In 1958, Clacton's Reg and Bob Young won a talent competition at the Savoy, and they went on to compare 59 shows there with lots of stars of the time like Dickie Valentine and Max Miller and Alma Cogan. And Reg, I know, is still with us. Reg Young, he's 99 in August, which is brilliant. In the 1950s, Will Hammer and Jack Payne put on shows at the Westcliff Theatre. Will Hammer's film company was Hammer House of Horror, made films such as The Curse of Frankenstein and Dracula. His real name was William Heinz, and he also had a chain of jeweller's shops that I remember, and cycle shops. And unfortunately, he died in a cycle accident in 1957. I'll tell you more in part 2 about the Westcliff Theatre and the Savoy. But in the 1970s, the shows were very popular, directed by Bunny Barron and Francis Golightly, and they were amazing, and there was often a full house. In the band pavilion was Ronnie Mills and his orchestra, and they entertained families with music and competitions. There were talent shows, and you can see on the right there a list of some of the games that Ronnie organised. There's Dress the Lady, Prettiest Mother Over 40, and Oldest Person competition. How times have changed. Eh? The Prince's Theatre at the Town Hall organised some wonderful shows too, and I'll tell you more in part 2 about their later years. In the 1960s and early 70s, wrestling was very popular on television, and in the summer months there were bouts at the Town Hall. There's some well-known wrestlers' names on the right there, Mick McManus and Johnny Quango. And there's a photo of Les Kellett on the left. He always looked like your dad. He always pretended to be hurt as he was thrown around the ring. He'd stagger and sway, and then suddenly burst into action and win. And ladies in the crowd would scream with delight and wave their handbags in the air. The last few sort of pictures, and Harry Thompson, who was the council's entertainment manager, would arrange for top groups and lesser-known groups to perform at the Town Hall, especially in July and August. This 1963 list mentions Freddie and the Dreamers there, and Brian Paul and the Tremolos, who some of us may remember. But I love some of the other group names. There's Terry Young Six with Erky Grant, Deke Rivers and the Raiders, and Dane Stevens and the Deep Beats, who I think changed their name to the Fairies after a while. I think I stuck with Dane Stevens and the Deep. And then in 1964, some of the group's names are much shorter suddenly. I recognised the Pretty Things, and then Dave Curtis and the Tremors down the bottom, who was a very popular local group. The Animals played at Clacton Town Hall on the 17th of August, and their big hit was The House of the Rising Sun, and it was #1 in the charts a few weeks before, and so Clacton Town Hall, as you imagine, was absolutely packed, and it was quite a coup for Harry Thompson to book them. Well, I'm going to stop there, and I hope you've enjoyed looking back at Clacton in the good old days, and I think now it's going to be time for a cuppa, so thank you very much.